Hey guys, Mulligan here, and welcome to another preview of the upcoming Eternal set, the Dusk Road. A new preview event mode has been announced for Eternal this weekend. Similar to the last time, with Omens of the Past, we get to try out some of the new cards in the decks we play in the event. So we'll be talking about those cards today, as well as some others that were spoiled. As with the Omens of the Past preview videos, I will only be talking about the cards as far as their use in Constructed, unless the card is absolutely terrible in that format, in which case I will briefly talk about its potential use in Draft. Let's hop in. So the first card is Hideout Pistol. This is a 2-power 1/0 weapon requiring 1 Shadow Influence to play. When this comes into play, if it's played on a Gunslinger, you kill an enemy unit with less strength than the wielder. So I really like this card, but it's partly because I'm excited to try out Gunslingers in general. I have to say that this card is Film Control's worst nightmare. There are so many Gunslingers that can kill their early game blockers once they equip this weapon. Argenport Instigator and Cabal Countess are the ones that come up since they have high strength for their cost. I even think Auric Vigilante is surprisingly good with this card. In terms of new cards we're getting, this of course pairs very well with Milos Azaleo and Stella to increase the chance of getting a clean attack in with either of them. Ashara is generally okay with this too, mainly because of her 3 strength, since the weapon doesn't have synergy with her second ability. This could also be pretty insane with Vicious Highwayman as well. A lot more units die to that combination. Some people are getting excited for 3-faction Gunslinger decks, and this does sound super sweet with Champion of Glory, but I'm being a little cautious since I haven't seen anything powerful enough to justify playing 3 factions, and those decks naturally have power and influence issues. Although there is a card I will be talking about that might enable that deck. As far as units, I don't think Kuriox will be the only 3-faction card we get, so there is hope for the 3-faction Gunslinger deck. A lot of people are calling this Suffocate on Pants, and I'm inclined to agree. The next card is Combustion Cell. This is a 2-power relic requiring 1 fire influence to play. Once per turn, you may sacrifice a unit to get +1 power this turn. If it was a Grenadin, get +2 power this turn instead. So this is the first of several cards that we're going to get to play with during this weekend's event. This has a ton of potential. I didn't think Grenadins would get a ramp tool, but here it is. This on turn 2, it followed up with an assembly line on turn 3, sounds pretty crazy, since it can potentially set you up to play a 6-cost card if you don't miss your power drop for turn 4. Gear Cruncher just got a lot easier to play with this card. I can really see a possible Praxis Tokens deck featuring Grenadins and maybe Tessia using this card, since the extra power gained is also something that Time usually has access to and has the cards to take advantage of it. There were even some talk of using this to get a turn 3 Sandstorm Titan for the event this weekend, assuming you're playing Grenadin Drone to do that. Of course, if you just want to stick with Stone Scar, there's always Scrap Tank to go along with your other token generators. Maybe you'd want to do all 3 factions together. Firetime Shadow Grenadin sounds pretty sweet. Up next is Gearmaster. This is a 4-power 2/2 unit requiring 2 time influence to play. When you play a Sentinel, draw a card and give Gearmaster +1/+1. So I wasn't very impressed when I first looked at the card. I've come around to it a little bit. It is card draw after all, but we don't have any cheap Sentinels in this game right now. The cheapest one you could play is Copper Conduit, and you do not want to play it early if you can help it. Anyway, she's probably fine in something like Praxis Midrange, which I expect people will play if they choose this card for the event this weekend. Sandstorm Titan is a given, as well as Heart of the Vault in that deck. But Combray Midrange could take advantage of this card as well if they want to run Reality Warden in their deck. There aren't a ton of Sentinels that are playable enough to all be seen in one deck right now, so I don't expect this card to get very big, but again, you're not playing her for the stats, you're playing her for the card draw, and this helps keep mid-range decks from running out of gas. If she stays alive long enough for you to play even 1 Sentinel, she effectively replaces herself. She has some potential in Constructed. The next card is Clutchmate, a 4-power spell requiring 1 primal influence to play. You play a copy of one of your units. If it's a dinosaur, give both +1/+1. Not a bad card. essentially a mirror image for dinosaur decks. Given the current crop of cards we have now, this isn't really a turn 4 play. The only decent hit you could get with this on turn 4 is Dilfex Stalker, since it has Killer. This might also be okay if Xenon or Time Primal Shadow Dinosaurs ever becomes a thing, since you have Shadowlands Bone Picker as a decent target. Outside of that, you get better value in the late game where you can copy stuff like Predatory Carnosaur. This will be cool to play with in the event this weekend. Beyond that, unless dinosaur decks are very powerful in the new meta, I think this will have the same fate as Mirror Image and be relegated to a possible draft pick, but not viable for Constructed. The next card is Bhisma, Revered Elder, a 4-power 3/3 unit requiring 2 Justice Influence to play. When you play another Unseen, Bhisma gets a random battle skill, and Bhisma has Entomb, where you give one of your units Bhisma's battle skills when he dies. Cool card. I have some concerns though that could potentially keep this guy from seeing play in Constructed. I'm pretty sure Darkveil Agent will be played with this guy, or in Unseen decks in general. The problem is by the time you play Bhisma, Night will have ended since it only lasts for 1 additional turn on your side. We would need another Unseen that costs 3, preferably Injustice or Primal, that summons Nightfall, for Bhisma to have a better chance of getting Aegis from Darkveil Agent. And even then, both still have to stick for a turn for Bhisma to get that Aegis. Outside of all that, Bhisma is extremely weak to silence effects, but that's not even my main concern. He's still playable despite that. But my bigger concern is that he faces competition from another Unseen 4-drop, Shelterwing Rider. Rider is just an overall better card. Bhisma has a higher ceiling than Rider, but also has a lower floor. The fact that he has synergy with cards like Master's Lesson and Huru Teachings, normally unplayable cards, kind of cements that. You could make the argument that if you pop Aegis, then Rider's useless, but in common game states, it never feels good to do that for most decks. I want to see this in Constructed, but like many other cards we've seen so far, Bhisma seeing play will depend on what other Unseen cards eventually get revealed. The next card is Battlefield Scavenger, a 2-power 1/3 unit requiring 1 Shadow Influence to play. He has Warcry and an ultimate where you can pay 5 to draw a Valkyrie from your Void and give it Warcry. Shadow getting Warcry still feels weird to me, but because of the text on this card and the lore of Eternal, it does make sense. It's clear this is meant to be used in Argenport. The most powerful constructed units you would want to give Warcry to are Valkyrie Enforcer and Valkyrie Spireguard with the ultimate. Of course, getting back a silence effect is amazing too. There are quite a few Valkyrie that have Revenge, so you get to draw a card with their Destiny trigger once they hit the Void, but none of them are constructed playable except for maybe Elias. But he's normally seen in Mono Justice decks due to the heavy influence requirement. I just don't think a glorified Minotaur Grunt is good enough to see play in Constructed, but there is a card we'll be touching on towards the end that might say otherwise. So the next one is directly from Brian Kibler's stream since he got to spoil a card, so the image isn't clean per se, so sorry in advance. But we've got Shadowlands Tyrant, a 5-power 6/4 unit requiring 3 Shadow Influence to play. It has Lifesteal, and when Shadowlands Tyrant attacks, he deals 1 damage to an enemy, then increase this ability by 1. Solid 5-drop. It's nice that this can target any enemy. With an effect like this, and this goes for most effects in general, it's best to think of it from a perspective of what is the expected value I'll get from this card in a common situation. It's unrealistic to think this will even get to 3 damage or beyond. If it does, great, but what is more likely is that this will get to 2 before being dealt with. If this gets to pick off 2 things, that's pretty insane value. It's good value even if it takes out an actual card with 1 health like Oni Ronin and not a token. This is probably going to see play in Life Force decks as a fairly easy way to trigger it. This has the exact same stat line and cost as the old Beckoning Lumen, after all. The Triple Shadow Influence will prevent this from ever seeing play in 3+ faction decks. I don't really see what this could be played in other than Xenon Life Force actually, but it should be solid there. The next card is Lost in the Mist, a 4-power spell requiring 1 time influence to play. You put an enemy unit into the enemy player's hand with cost increased by 2. The art is amazing on this. I just want to say that first. As far as the effect of the card itself, I'm not as positive on it. I don't think this is outright bad, but a 4-cost teleport at slow speed isn't exactly exciting, and I don't think increasing the cost of the bounce unit by 2 quite makes up for it. This only really shines if you target 4-cost units or more, since you will, at worst, spend the same amount of power your opponent did to play the unit. Bouncing back something 3 cost or cheaper just sounds awful. So this is basically pretty good against mid-range and control decks and not so good against aggro. At best, you keep aggro from playing the 2 cards they wanted to play on their turn, but I think this is little more than a speed bump for them, and not something that actually affects them. This is probably going to be better in draft, but maybe it sneaks into a sideboard for tournaments depending on the metagame. Next card is Common Cause. This is a power where if 2 units in your hand share a type, you gain an influence of your choice. So this is the card I was talking about when touching on Hideout Pistol. I was shocked when Scarlatch spoiled this card. We always talk about getting new power cards in future sets, but I still can't believe it's actually happening in the Dusk Road. I think part of my shock was the fact that this card is actually good. Since the Dusk Road is all about tribal cards, I expect this to see a ton of play in 2-faction tribal decks. It's also cool that this doesn't enable the current 3-faction greed pile decks we have even further, something I'm not a fan of in this game. But it could enable that 3-faction gunslinger deck that I alluded to earlier, and that some people are excited for. Very solid card for the upcoming metagame. The only sad thing is that over time, I could see this card getting weaker as we get more and more sets that don't focus on tribal synergy. So this next card is directly from Ilion's stream, since he also got to spoil a card. The image on this isn't clean either, so sorry in advance. But we have Corrupt, a 2-power fast spell requiring 1 shadow influence to play. You steal an enemy spell played on you or one of your units and redirect it to an enemy. I am super excited for this card. It's not the counter magic that so many players are looking for, a card that actually negates units once they're played before they get to use any of their effects, but it's still a super sweet card. I like this way more than Backlash. The fact that it's in Shadow is sweet as well, since every counterspell has been in Primal so far. Completely blowing out someone's Channel of the Tempest sounds like one of the greatest feelings in the world. But just being able to decide what spell you want to steal and redirect gives you a lot of choice. I'm trying not to get too excited though. Not every spell targets something in the game, but the majority of them do. This is basically madness for 1 cost less that steals single target spells. I'm hoping to see this in Constructed. Up next we have Daring Pioneer, a 3-power 4/4 unit requiring 2 primal influence to play. She has Overwhelm, and when an enemy plays a spell, sacrifice Daring Pioneer to negate it. This seems pretty strong. You get higher stats than average for the cost and an Overwhelm ability, and you negate the first spell your opponent plays by giving up this unit. I think this has a lot of potential in Constructed. It's almost like this has Aegis, but it's not quite as good. This can protect your other threats that you have on the board. It isn't even a terrible top deck late game. Now there is counterplay to this type of effect, since it's a unit on the board that they can see. So your opponent could simply use a spell they don't care about first, before using the spell they actually want. Here's the thing though, good decks play with good spells. There will be matchups where they will have spells that are useless, but I think for the most part, your opponent will be in an awkward position where they care about all their spells in hand, and they have to sack one to deal with this thing. This is the first Explorer that I'm actually excited about. I won't be surprised if this sees play in Constructed somewhere. And the final card for this video is Amelie Cloud Marshal, a 5-power 4/8 unit requiring 3 Justice Influence to play. She has Flying. When Amelie attacks, play a 1/1 Valkyrie with Flying then increase this ability by +1/+1. And here we have the Verse Valkyrie that I'm really excited about. This is just a solid unit. 8 health, even on a 5-drop, is pretty insane. She can't attack past Sandstorm Titan, but that's not really a big deal in a faction that has some of the best answers to a Titan. Similar ability to Shadowlands Tyrant, but I personally like this one a little better. That 8 health is definitely going to help her get attacks in and survive combat, so I could see this snowballing out of control. While I'm still waiting for the playable Valkyrie 2-drop, I do like that this costs 5. You could argue that Inquisitor Mokdo competes with this, and maybe certain Argenport decks want Mokdo over this card, but she at least has synergy with the Battlefield Scavenger we looked at earlier. I think Mokdo and this will end up in different decks and won't compete with each other at all. They just functionally do 2 different things. I'm glad there's a reason to play Valkyries now, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an Argenport. Thanks for listening to my thoughts on most of the spoilers we got from the upcoming Dusk Road set. If you liked this video, feel free to hit the like button. Let me know in the comments if you have any feedback for the content and what cards you're excited for in the new set. I've got other Eternal content on this channel as well, so feel free to look around. If you don't want to miss future content, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for taking time out of your day to watch this, and I'll see you all soon. Take care.